What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and if you guys have been paying attention to me, I've been talking a lot about cottages recently. I think vacation rental properties are going to become huge. I think domestic travel is going to become huge in Canada. And so because of that, today we're bringing on Ryan from Carson Law, and he's going to be talking to us, what do we need to be aware of when buying a cottage versus buying, say, a residential, just normal, plain Jane property, because there are some differences and it's important that you be informed when you're going into those transactions. So smash the like button, hit subscribe, and let's jump into it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Matt McKeever's YouTube channel on real estate investing in Canada. Today I've got with us Ryan Carson from Carson Law, and we're going to be talking all about the differences between buying cottages and buying residential properties. Obviously, with the international travel being a little bit diminished this year and very hard to do or difficult to do, some people are stuck in Canada, in their provinces, sometimes even close to home, and they're turning to other domestic alternatives like cottages, whether that's for short-term rental purposes or whether that's just buying a cottage for the family as a place to get away domestically and take over that vacation. So welcome back, Ryan from Carson Law. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again, guys.
Yeah, no worries. So Ryan, let's just get jumping right into this. What are some of the differences between buying a cottage compared to buying a residential residence? How do we get into this? How do we jump into these cottage opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And there are some other great resources. If you follow another well-known lawyer named Bob Aaron, he just recently wrote a really great article in the Toronto Star. He always writes in the Toronto Star, and it was just on cottage purchases. So if you did a search of Bob Aaron and Toronto Star, you could probably have a nice read of a really good article on what to think about. And so really with cottage properties, the biggest issues that kind of come up with them are because they're usually, as you could likely imagine, very old properties that have kind of gone through a lot of change, whether it was a huge lot that got severed into like all these smaller lots, whether it's waterfront, whether it's road or boat access, whether it's a private roadway. Is it well? Is it septic? Is it on city services? Those are all going to be kind of additional items that you don't really have to worry about when you're kind of buying in an urbanized center and you're just buying like a subdivided lot, just on a regular street, right? You don't have to worry probably about waterfront. You're not worried about well and septic because it's on city services. You're probably not worried about vehicle access because there's roadways all over the place and they're owned and maintained and so forth by the city, which you have access to. So a lot of these things aren't in play, but with a cottage, they almost most certainly are. So a lot of people are obviously, like you said, buying it for some sort of recreational, likely seasonal use and purpose. A lot of times people are looking to acquire it for like waterfront. A lot of cottage properties are waterfront acquisitions. That's probably a huge part of the value add to some of these properties, as well as how you want to use it. So maybe we could start right there. One thing to know about is there's this, I'll try to make it as kind of simple as I can. When these properties were originally being sold by the government, the government owned all the land, and then it started to sell them all these decades ago to people interested in acquiring property to develop and create these homes and cottages. The government retained a piece called the shore allowance, or they call it a road allowance. And so basically what ended up happening is there was this reserve of land that kind of went along the edge of the property to the water, typically, to allow the city to, or the government to always continue to have this access piece across all the lands. And so one thing you'd want to know right away when you're acquiring a property that's a cottage, especially if it's supposed to be waterfront, like you want to know you own right up to the water. You want to make sure that you own this shore or road allowance. And this is either typically found in like the title search, or it could be potentially found in like city municipal records, like with the building department and that kind of thing. But you want to kind of know that, number one, because otherwise, if you don't actually own that, strip of land leading up to the water, well, theoretically, the government could come along and say, what are you doing building a dock on my land? And you're like, what are you talking about? This is my cottage. I bought it. Well, yeah, you did, but only up to the road allowance or the shore allowance. We own from here in. And so this has become something that's a bit profitable for the municipalities. As you can imagine, they're pretty strapped for cash. So they try to find ways to make money. So they actually fairly significantly enforce some of these road shore allowances, because now they can turn around in a leveraged position and say to the cottage owner, hey, you don't actually have the right to have this dock here.
You've
or
built
have access here. Yeah. So you can't put your boathouse there. You can't put your dock there. You can't even actually cross our land to use the water, which of course you want to do with all your toys and everything.
Right.
So, if you want to, you're going to have to buy this from us. So as you can imagine, they sell it probably at a bit of a premium. So that's one thing to definitely consider right off the hopper when you're buying a cottage property is it waterfront, and who owns, if there is, a shore or road allowance?
Yeah, I mean, that could be incredibly problematic. So obviously you're going to want a dock if you're waterfront. Boathouses are incredibly common on, the Muskoka lakes or any of the big lakes. So no, that's a really interesting point you made. And then the one thing that you mentioned in there sort of in passing is that this type of thing might come up on a title search. So if you could just walk us through, like, what does that really mean? Like, is this a surveyor coming out, or is this something looking at previous data from a surveyor? How does a title search actually work? And when am I, as the buyer, going to become aware of this potential thing? Because I guess one thing I'm kind of thinking of right now is, oh no, have I already got an agreement in place before I even know about this? And then am I potentially through my conditional period before I'm finding out about this? So
yeah. So that certainly could happen. I mean, if you look at a regular agreement of purchase and sale, I think it's paragraph 8 and 10. Paragraph 8 talks about the title search and the zoning of the property and how it's used. And then paragraph 10 talks about sort of the scenario of the what if, like you just mentioned. What if we find something on title, we can't get a resolution to it, and or the intended use can't be accomplished because we uncover something. So as long as the lawyer does the searches of title, that's through the land registry office. So like we electronically pull out data from the government resources of the land registry office to look at, what's registered to title. Like, are there mortgages? Are there liens? Like what's going on? Is there documentation and evidence related to like a shore or road allowance component, right? Otherwise, there are some other searches you can order from the local municipality and cities in regards to building, zoning, and work orders to help satisfy your possible intended use and desire of the property, right? But let's say in paragraph 8, it says, let's say the closing date on completion of the agreement is July 30th. You have until July 15th to do your title search or your searches. And that's listed in paragraph 8. So your lawyer would have until that date to submit any sort of what we call title requisitions or off title requisitions about anything about the deal, and would allude to these issues of, like, say, shore and road allowances at that time. And then if the seller's lawyer is like, well, sorry, we're not going to do anything about it, you take the deal or not, then that's when paragraph 10 actually, if it's the boilerplate use of paragraph 10 in the Ontario Real Estate Association Agreement of Purchase and Sale, it does indicate, here's your recourses, of which one of them is like rescission of the contract.
And in that case, sorry to cut off your train of thought there, but in that exact example, so say something comes up in the title search, it wasn't exactly what we wanted. how important is it going to be to have that intended use written out there? Because if I'm not mistaken, that number 7 or whichever one you had noted, the first
8,
one is going to have the intended use, but it's a blank. So what happens if I leave that blank?
Yeah, you don't want to leave it blank.
You do not want to leave that blank. Okay.
No, you really don't want to leave that blank. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, who knows the reason for it, right? But you want to, like, you might not know how they use it, but who cares how they use it? You want to put in like how you want to use it.
What so I want as the buyer.
Yeah. Like if you want it to be a single family residential cottage, put that in there, right?
Right.
If you want this to be noted to be able to be used as a duplex, okay, put her in there, right? Like you definitely want to make use of that bracketed area in paragraph 8, because if you don't, then it becomes a lot harder for your lawyer to then argue that any sort of use issues that might be there, right?
Sure.
Because, you know, the thing that's common, and maybe this isn't as common with cottages, it's more common with people like buying multi-residential properties. The problem is in the listing agreement, it says, oh yeah, it's a legal duplex, or oh yeah, it's a quad or whatever, right? And then when we do searches, it turns out, well, it's not, right? Like the zoning doesn't permit for it, or the city records come in and they say, oh, we don't have this as a multi-res, we have it as a single family. But if you left that blank and you try to rely on the listing agreement, I mean, again, I'd probably have to do a little bit of case law research on listing agreements, but I don't feel that they have been found to be binding.
Yeah.
Because they're really just an advertisement, right? Obviously, you could argue construction arguments of representation, and, proper representation and negotiating in good faith and those sorts of things. Like that's what somebody would try to argue for you. Yeah. But there's also the obligation of doing your own due diligence, which would be used against you, right? So just because somebody says it is a duplex or it does have like waterfront access, you probably, as a reasonable buyer, need to do some of your own legwork to confirm that within, the parameters of the contract. And that's what they'd argue back with. So definitely you want to put in Section 8 on any agreement. Forget if it's a cottage, but if it's a cottage, put in cottage single family residential use, right?
So I'm not going to put words into Ryan's mouth here. So I'll use my own story so he doesn't have to stand by anything here. I'm telling you right now, you'll want to fill in this section, okay? Because I've had this exact circumstance where as an assignment, we fully believed we had a fourplex is what we were looking at. And lo and behold, eventually in the title search came out, it's actually not permitted as that use by the city. However, in the exact circumstance Brian just talked about, we had looked at a previous listing that suggested it was a fourplex. We had also looked at the idea, that this building had 4 meters and it had 4 parking spaces and 4 self-contained units. If it looks like a fourplex, walks like a fourplex, and quacks like a fourplex, it should be a fourplex. However, we left that section blank. And, everybody was confused. And by the end of it, what ended up happening is we had to give consideration for this. And I'm sure we probably didn't have to, but it was the right thing to do. That property was not, in fact, a legal fourplex. It was, in fact, zoned or permitted for 2 legal units. And so I think what would have really helped us, everybody out in this circumstance, would have been filling in that bracketed area. And we'll see if Peter can put a cutaway to that here for you guys to just look at what we're talking about. But there's an intended use bracket there that you're supposed to fill in. And we had missed that detail. So it certainly caused problems with us. And what it led to was having to have that consideration that we had to give to our assignee, as well as some additional legal costs. So this is something that could be avoided by filling this form in properly. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at, right? It's just do this stuff right the first time so that it's not a problem later.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I mean, a couple other things to consider with like cottage purchases. So we've kind of talked about this double check and make sure that you actually, if you think you have waterfront access, make sure you really do have the waterfront access. So you're not blocked by a shore or road allowance. Road access, just period. So, if you show up at the property and, you drive down a road that is definitely not a road, like you have to be a billy goat or something to try to get in, or, everybody, I think, gets the idea of what I'm talking about. This is clearly not a city maintained road. It probably actually converses over some of your neighbors' properties. So it's not uncommon at all when lawyers look at title searches on cottage acquisitions that we bring the note up to the client of, just so you know, like this is landlocked. Like there's no way a vehicle can get there. And then the client's like, oh no, like I drive down the dirt road all the time. The guy's been doing it for 50 years. Okay. So the question is there like a cottagers association that there's an agreement that maintains this road? Who owns it, right? Who maintains the road? Who's liable for the road? These kinds of things, right? So,
and to explore that idea, what do you think is the best solution? So I find myself a landlocked cottage. I love the property. There is a path that I'm using to drive in. Should I attempt to secure maybe a lease or something like that from whomever owns the property? Do you think that's a good option, or is there a better way to go about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, most of the time there's something in place already,
right?
Like there could be an easement over title, right? So that would actually end up being the best situation, because it just means there's a legal right for you to go over other people's property to access yours. Okay, fantastic. So as long as the easement's all properly registered across all the properties, perfect. You don't have to pay any money for it or anything like that. It just exists because of title. That's great. If that's not the case, and let's say, for example, the city road kind of stops at a point, and then there's this carve off, and it's a gravel road, and the gravel road is not on your subject property that you're looking to buy, but it is on property A, B, and C, and your property D. A lot of times what we see with A, B, and C and D is there's some private roadway agreement. So it's just this, and sometimes that's registered to title, sometimes it's not, right? And sometimes it's actually in writing and sometimes it's not, right? So obviously the more that's in writing and the more detailed, the better, because it should outline like, okay, so who actually owns this? Who actually has right to it? What's the ingress and egress, ability for whoever? Is there a fee to pay? Who's responsible for insuring it? Who maintains it? Who's plowing it in the winter if it's all seasonal? Those kinds of things, right? So obviously having an agreement in writing and with those details is pretty important if you can get it. A registered easement would be the best, obviously. So those are kind of key things that typically come up. 9 times out of 10, we usually find that there's something that exists with these things, especially if they've been around for generations, which is typical.
Yeah.
Or there's like a cottagers association, right? So like it could be a much bigger area that's all fed by the same thing, and then there's like a cottagers association agreement, right? It's kind of like when you buy into a condo in an urbanized area or a co-op, you're basically kind of buying a membership to this cottagers agreement, and the cottagers association owns the right of this land and maintains it and insures it and blah blah blah, right? So that sometimes comes up, but usually it's some sort of hopefully a registered easement or right of way. And if that doesn't exist, hopefully there's some sort of private roadway agreement of sorts. Otherwise, that's going to be one of the things we're going to obviously have to kind of make our client aware of and inquire with the sellers and just kind of say like, so I get this guy's traveled this road for 30 years, but it's technically landlocked. Now, that being said, if they've been able to do all that, there could be other triggering mechanisms to just sort of say there's like a prescriptive easement. So just because you've used it for so long without being challenged or whatever, by law, there's now this right.
Got it. All right, Ryan. Well, thank you so much. I know I learned a bunch there. I really hadn't thought about the shoreline at all, or the road access preventing you from building a dock, which is probably the first thing you want to do when you get your cottage, is bushwhack your way down to the water and get a boat or a sea-doo in there. So I think that's a really insightful piece for anybody that's hoping to purchase. And obviously, this is really interesting to know too about the road allowance and how that might work, as well as looking into cottagers associations. But I'm going to leave that to the professionals. Okay. So if you guys are thinking, wow, I need to know more about this, I do recommend you reach out to Carson Law. Ryan, how can they get a hold of you if they've got real estate that they're looking at purchasing and they need some of these agreements done, or they are looking at buying a cottage? How can we get to you?
Yeah, best way to get our contact information, go to our website, www.carsonlaw.ca, or you can give me a call. My number will be listed on the website at the office, or my cell number is available too under my personal information, or email ryan@carsonlaw.ca.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, Ryan will be back on the channel. We've got a lot more questions about Canadian real estate and the law around that. And I know that this is something that comes up all the time in our coaching and mentorship. So if you guys are enjoying these talks, leave a comment for us. Make sure you subscribe and check back in for the latest from Carson Law on our next videos. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
All right.
What is up, YouTube? Sorry to interrupt, but before you guys wrap up this video, I've got a quick announcement. We put together a survey where I'd love to get your input on your perspective on what other content should we shoot on this YouTube channel. I've literally made thousands of videos, talked for thousands of hours now about YouTube, and I'm just not always sure what to talk about next. Sometimes it feels like I'm just beating a dead horse, but I'd love to hear from you guys. What subjects should we go reapproach? What videos should we remake? What subjects have we just completely ignored that, like, duh, we need to go make a video about that? Let us know, not in the comment section, but through this survey, and there'll be a link in the video description down below. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next video.